Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special Halloween edition of NinjaRMM's MSP Live Chats. I'm Jonathan Scarecrow. I've got, once again with me, Tom M.R.R. Watson. Hey, Tom. And I've also got a special guest with us. We have Alan Killer KPI Edwards from your Eureka process. And we're really happy to have everybody here. I'm going to turn that off for now and get my light back on. Thanks, everybody, for joining. If this is your first time here for one of these chats, maybe you can already tell we try to do things a little bit differently. We're trying to make this as unique as possible, as interactive as possible. So I see everyone's already chiming in the chat. That's awesome. It's great to see people who have been coming in for our previous chats. Kristen, good to see you again. And we got Lisa Compton, who's from the Wiser group. Good to see you. Kelvin, of course. And so lots of return members. Love to see that. For anyone who's new, feel free to jump in the chat too. If you have a question that comes up during this chat, go down to the bottom of your screen. You're going to see Ask a Question there. You'll also see polls. I'm going to call these out as we go through, but I already went ahead and made all these polls live. So feel free to go ahead and jump in, fill out those polls. That's going to give us some interesting talking points. What brings us all here together today is to talk about the horror stories that I'm sure everyone on the line has experienced. And I know these two guys have, because Alan and Tom, they have the luxury and maybe bad fortune sometimes of seeing lots of things they can't unsee. And that's from being MSPs themselves, but also working with and helping MSPs now. Alan, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background, kind of before we get into some of the horrors and also the good things that you've seen.
Sure. So Alan Edwards, I founded Eureka Process back in 2017. Started out in IT professionally in 1994. I like to joke that it's not because I'm that old. I just started really young. By 2002, I had founded my first IT services firm. By 2011, I had sold it, and I went on to run two other MSPs in leadership before founding this company. That's the short story.
Nice. And Tom, a lot of people have, anyone who's been in the chats knows your story before, but for anybody new, you want to give them a little rundown of your background?
Sure. Yeah, I actually joined the team in January of this year. Jonathan and I have done a lot of MSP live chats together and other content. And my history is I previously owned a managed service provider business for 15 years. I sold it 5 years ago, took a couple years off, and then I came back and I've been on the vendor side, first at Axient for 2.5 years, and now with Ninja, creating content and keeping connected with MSPs out there.
All right, guys. Well, again, like what brings us here is to talk about horror stories, and I know that everyone's got some. Specifically, we wanted to talk about process and documentation kind of horror stories, and I guess to put it another way, a lot of the horror stories that you guys have seen working with some MSPs and seeing how things can be very painful at times. Ultimately, it kind of boils down to lack of those things, lack of processes, lack of documentation. I know we were chatting earlier in the week, and I'm going to share this doc. It looks like Sammy, our marketing coordinator who's on the call, thank you, Sammy, has dropped in an agenda doc to the chat. And so you guys can feel free to jump in that. This is going to be a loose guide for us to guide conversation. I'm also going to be updating it live with any links to resources that people are citing. And I'm going to pull it up on the screen now. But earlier in the week, we were talking about, can we categorize the ways that things can kind of go wrong? And we came up with a few different categories: productivity vampires, cases of micromanagement, or other cases where management really is just kind of in the dark about things. And then, of course, clients from hell. But Alan, is there one of those things that you kind of wanted to jump into first that you've seen working with your clients?
I think being on the vendor side now, probably the number one thing that I see that's difficult to address is micromanagement. And there's always a root cause to it. So I could probably share a horror story if I may.
Yeah, definitely.
About this. I was telling Jonathan earlier that it's like horror stories. Do I have any? And I realized I'm just an optimistic guy. And I didn't realize they were negative. I was like, oh, here's an opportunity to fix things. So remember that. There's always opportunity to fix things. So I had a client in the past where this owner was micromanaging, and this firm was 20 plus, so that's a lot of people to micromanage, if you can imagine. And the service manager was like fed up. He's like, why do I do anything? Because he's just going to jump in and take care of it with the technicians anyways. And I could definitely see the service manager's frustrations and why he'd be frustrated. And at first glance, the answer is, hey, don't do that. But that's not so easy, right? This owner built their business off of a certain reputation, a certain level of quality, and it wasn't being obtained, or at least it perceived to not be obtained. And so just to jump straight to the solution, in our case, it was about, of course, setting clear responsibilities and expectations. And the easiest way to do that was developing KPIs, or as Jonathan would say, killer performance indicators versus key performance indicators. And we actually ended up agreeing on just 3 KPIs. And the answer was, if your service manager can meet these KPIs, do you promise to take all issues to him instead of to the team directly? And the answer was yes. What's really funny is about the story is in the end, we realized the service manager was the problem. And we had to take care of that. So it was a sad story, but we had a numeric way to make that happen. And we could see that things weren't happening. They did ultimately replace that service manager. They used those same KPIs. And during training, as KPIs got into the green, like, okay, I'm going to go to you for problems that I have instead of your team. And it's been over a year now, and that client is still keeping those KPIs in the green, and the micromanagement is no longer the issue that it used to be. So it's not just that people are micromanagers. It's usually that they're not getting the results they want, or they're perceiving not to get the results they want.
Yeah, that's a really great story to share. And I want to get comments from the chat here. Of course, we got people maybe do you feel comfortable chatting about this, about your own current work environment, or maybe you don't. But if you had experience, maybe this can be anonymous, or maybe this is a previous work environment that you're in, about micromanagement and that being an issue. Would really be interested to hear it. Robert, thank you for sharing a horror story here. I also, while we let people kind of chime in there or do some typing, looking at the polls here, guys, I see we asked a couple of questions relating to things you just brought up, Alan. The first one is KPIs. Do you have KPIs that you're tracking? And we've got this very split where some people are saying yes. A lot of people are not really sure or no. I'm going to put the not sure mostly maybe in the no category. But yeah. So maybe do you want to talk a little bit more about maybe kind of stepping back a little bit and just an intro to KPIs, I guess.
All right. I have so much on KPIs. First of all, I like to categorize KPIs into 2 general categories: scorecard-worthy KPIs and dashboard-worthy KPIs. Scorecard focuses more on the K, meaning you want as few numbers to measure as possible. Don't worry about the details. Look at the big picture. Some example of scorecard-worthy KPIs, which should cover all your departments: finance, sales, and operations. I know we tend to focus on operations a lot. General resolution time could be a great KPI. Hopefully you have your PSA set up to measure SLAs, even if you're not trying to meet any particular SLAs. Another great one is Csat, customer satisfaction. There are plenty of ways to measure that if you want to get a number. There's tons of products in the market that integrate with PSAs, et cetera, or standalone products to help you measure that, or you can just ask. That's fine too. Some finance ones are, for example, dollars over 60 days past due, or over 30 days past due. Or perhaps it's your number of net new MSP contracts for the last 30 days. Those are the big top line numbers. You don't want to know every detail. Now, when you start managing down, when you start wanting to hold your service manager responsible, for example, how many people said they have a dedicated service manager?
So looking here, I think, we got almost twice as many saying no, but we definitely have a handful saying yes.
Well, the good news is you all have a service manager, but it might be you on top of all of your other duties, right? So when you get into that level, you want to go a little deeper into your KPIs. So for a service manager dashboard where you have more numbers, you might not only have resolution time and Csat, but you might have ESAT. employee satisfaction, a little harder to measure. We can cover that another day. Or response time, or how quickly am I even getting to the ticket the first time? Another fun one would be such as a number of time entries on a ticket or ticket touches. How many times do we have to handle the football before we can finish the play and make the first down? Those are just some examples of the types of KPIs I would be looking for. And they can get more and more granular, even down to an individual technician or even an individual person in finance or sales, where they have their own set of 3 to 7 numbers. I've got to keep these in the green.
And so this is something, we've got a lot of great things coming up in the chat and a lot of good stories coming up. And I want to come back to them. But before we get in there, one more question for you. This is something that the three of us talk about. When we're talking about KPIs and metrics, I know for myself, when I just first started looking up, I was curious, okay, are there lists out there of metrics that MSPs can follow? And I think I came across BrightGauge having like a page where it's like 72 metrics for MSPs. And it was just kind of like, okay, what, like, you just dialed it back and gave a list of some higher level stuff that people can get started with. But what about when is the right point for people to start looking at these things and really starting to get serious about it? Are people waiting until they experience horror stories, or is there a good point to do that before that happens?
I would treat it the same way I treat processes in general. You absolutely can have too many KPIs too soon. You can absolutely have too many processes too soon. If you're a 1, 2, 3 person shop, I'd prefer you out there selling and delivering service and invoicing. Go out there, make money, do it the hard way. Guerrilla marketing, guerrilla warfare, whatever, get it done. But as you start to grow beyond that, these things become more necessary, and you start at the very high level. A common question I ask a younger business is, do you know your profit and loss? It's not as sexy as a BrightGauge or auto task gauges or any of those other widgets or other things, but just even looking at your financials once a month is a great practice. I'm sure, Tom, what were the type of stuff that you first started looking at in your business?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing for me was cash flow related. That was, when is that money coming in? What does that look like? What time of the month? The next thing, the KPIs I was really looking for were technician productivity. How many hours can you really expect in a billable sense from a technician per day, per week, per month? So those were my big things that kind of drove my business. And, a lot of these things, we've been talking about this. There are a lot of fancy tools now. My MSP goes back to starting in 2000. So this is long before a lot of these tools are. And one of the things we were talking about in our prep call for this was documentation. And I had a lot of problems with documentation. I don't know if you want to speak to that, and I can come back in with some of my horror stories about that.
Well, go ahead. Before we get the how to do it right, let's hear how to do it wrong. Can you share a horror story?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I'll tell you what we did. We used a NetDoc. It was basically an RTF document so that we could open it on any machine, any server, and we would keep the primary copy in a folder on the client server, and then we would copy that. The person who did it was responsible to copy that document to the Documents tab for the company in ConnectWise. And I mean, this was going back. This was before we had like these IT documentation tools. There were some things out there, but they weren't purpose built for MSPs. So we had kind of kept with our old thing because we had over 100 networks. What are you going to do? The problem with this is that, and I was talking to Alan about it, is that no one had real responsibility or a real impetus to keep this thing updated and put it in the right place. We would end up with situations where we were locked out of accounts, sometimes locked out of servers, and it was, who has the newest version of the NetDoc? Where is it? And those problems are often solved. And I know one of the things you do in your business, Alan, is process. And maybe you can speak to us about how that works with documentation in today's age.
I mean, like the first question I would ask Tom and that system you had, first of all, any system is better than no system. Tom, your system was honestly the best decision you could make for the information you had at the time, right? And then you experienced a challenge and you had to improve it. And the first question I usually ask when a process isn't working for me is, what is the natural reward to the person using it? Like, why would somebody update it? Because it's really hard to think about the greater good for something that might not ever happen. You might never need this documentation. So why should I spend my time documenting it? Now, so before I do my part, Tom, you had mentioned earlier that you found the solution based exactly on that, making somebody care more about the result. What was that solution?
Yeah, we had this really loose setup early on where pretty much everyone worked on every network, whoever was available. And then I realized that you needed to give people like a level of accountability for a network. So they were like the lead, and they had a certain networks where they were responsible for it. They had to make sure others did things the right way because it affected them and their performance. And I had a whole bonus system built in. So once I did that, that pretty much took care of the NetDoc updating problem because it was on someone's plate and they were responsible for it. So they made others responsible under them.
Excellent. So when everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. And you develop that one team lead. And when it comes to process and documentation, it kind of comes to the same way. So let's say I wanted to start out on a documentation. First of all, I believe a documentation project is a mistake. It's a big whoop-de-doo, lots of time spent. You get a lot of documentation. It doesn't have anything to do with maintaining it afterwards, which is the tricky part, which comes down to accountability. My method is that typically, depending on your size, you have a documentation committee. I try to get a low-level tech, a high-level tech, and somebody from management in there somewhere so we can get all the perspectives. You figure out what do we have to document, meaning what is necessary to document, and what is sufficient. So we have to document the minimum required because we're trying to reward our technicians and our people for using the system. So if we ask them to document 1,000 things and we only need 10, that's not a reward. And by having our peers involved in the process, they're more likely to continue it. And then as they develop, hey, we're going to document this NetDoc. As we're going to document this, we need A through C. We don't need D through F. I have the tier 3 tech document it once, make adjustments with the team. Then I have the tier 1 tech document it again, give us feedback. Then we have everybody on the team document one thing. And then from there, the rule is if you see it, fix it. And we check in that in the documentation committee every week. That's how I roll it out. And you saw the number of people involved, and I think it does require that number of people. So if you only have 2 or 3 people, pick your documentation sparingly. What are the high value assets to document? Common examples of high value assets are firewalls. My favorite, site summary. Tell me about how the site works. And internet for those 3 a.m. calls. The internet's down. Who do you call?
Yeah, and so Alan, you're saying initially having these products to initially get things up off the ground. Things are being reviewed on a pretty regular basis. What about after that? Where how are you seeing clients stay on top of this stuff? Have you run into cases where people think they have the documentation and then realize, actually, no, we don't, or this is not being maintained well?
Ask your question again. I wanted to find a starting point for that answer.
Sure. Are you seeing any clients where they think maybe the owner thinks the documentation is, yep, we're good to go there, but actually when you dig into it, that's not actually the case?
I don't think I've had an issue where the owner didn't know it was an issue. I think the issue is similar to that I have seen frequently is, hey, we have a lot of documentation, but who's using it? I think that's a bigger issue I've seen. And my solution is very similar to what I just stated, which was getting their involvement and keeping it updated. Why does it exist? Don't forget your documentation about documentation, your meta knowledge. I have the process is one of our processes. How do you write a process? Where do you store it? Why do you store it there? The same thing for client asset documentation. I have a document D05, client asset documentation, where even if you're using a tool like IT Glue or Passport or Ocular or others, I write down the decisions I've made. I don't rely on the fact that I go into a flexible asset if you're using IT Glue and go, oh, here's the fields, this is how I fill it out. I write it in a document separately so that you can see what have we decided and why. Because there's a bunch of other stuff that might have came with the system or other ideas we're playing with that aren't fully vetted yet. And then during employee onboarding, for example, if an employee comes to me with a question about, hey, I don't understand what to put here in this field, I answer the question in the documentation about how to document. Any question that comes up, I expand upon it. Did I get close to an answer on that one?
I think so. Yeah. I bring this up part like Jason in the comments. They're saying when docs are created, be sure to review on a regular basis. Because an easy audit finding if something's been created but nobody reviews, updates it for years. So basically, going back to what you're saying, we have tons of documentation, but is it actually being used? Is it relevant?
Yeah, and I mean, there are so many strategies I love. Many systems have methodologies for automatically apply. Many PSAs have many systems for automatically applying a template to the ticket. I will frequently categorize a ticket, cause a template to fire that adds a link to your documentation to the ticket. So that, again, you're making it natural consequence. This is easy to reference the documentation.
Actually, going back to that point a little bit. So easy consequence or immediate consequence, and then benefits too. This is one topic that came up with us. And I know, Tom, you actually had some ideas around this where you had some incentives, some financial incentives around performance and documentation, right?
Oh yeah, I did a thing where I paid $750, $1,000, or $1,250 a month in bonuses, and it was just I laugh about it because it was just for things like putting all your time entries in and then going above. Like, I viewed it as you were lucky to get like 25 hours of truly what would be billable work if we weren't doing managed services. If we did 30, I think I consider that very good. If it was 35 more, because of course you have what a lot of people would tell you, a half an hour or more administrative time for every hour that could be billed. And but I just incentivize people to do things right. I just found it worked well for me, paying people. And I would incentivize for following process and time entries, things you wouldn't think you would have to, but it seemed to me with technicians, it seemed to deliver the results.
I'm curious, Tom, did you find a difference in how technicians behave? For example, as you say you go up the skill level of technicians, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, if you split them up that way. I'm mainly talking about pay rates here. Yeah. Those incentives work less for those people who have the nice salaries.
I find with the higher level people that were more management and career focused that I had to do as much of that. Right. It was more about having some authority and a good position, and that wasn't as important. They did their jobs anyways. I found for more level 1, level 2 technicians, maybe guys who didn't have a focus on taking it to the next level of management or something like that.
I've had horror stories also on compensation plans for compliance. We had one that was a little bit complex to compute, and we had it a few times where the computations were wrong, and it was a very difficult thing to fix. But I like the simplicity of yours, where you had just a single metric with a number attached to it, without a whole lot of other questions into the details.
So, guys, I brought on Dan Comas. Hey, how you doing, Dan?
Doing great. How you guys doing?
Doing Good. Well. And Dan, I'm so glad to see you in here in the chat, because you and I recently had a conversation where you were talking about kind of a big shift for your company. And this dives into some of the things we're talking about, because we're talking about documentation processes. We're also talking about service managers. I know Alan and Tom both have a lot to say about hiring service managers, but I really wanted to bring you on to see if you were open to share anything about the process you just went through in terms of outsourcing, and kind of going through all the documentation that was involved with that. Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, that's fine. I joined without knowing what I was getting into, but I trusted it. So 60 days ago, we started outsourcing, or rather partnering with a technical service team to handle our level 0, level 1, some level 2 tickets. Like most people, we had a big increase in service requests this year. So our way to manage that was to go with a third party to kind of balance some of that work. With that, part of the onboarding and preparing, we were advised that we should review our documentation, and we really should follow some basic guidelines to make things easier for the team that was coming in to help us. And we did that. And we were super excited about the hard work we put into our now perfect documentation. And then we went live, and it was not perfect. And it was a gut punch. You know, we thought we had translated all of our tribal knowledge into our process management. We use IT Glue. And man, we were I couldn't believe how far off the mark we were in some areas, you know, and internally we went over it 10 times. We're like, this is great. This would be perfect for, somebody who walked in the door the first day junior tech. That's it. You got the documents. You're good to go. This person's gonna be a superstar. Man, we were so wrong.
Curiously, 60 days later, how are you doing now?
We're doing great.
See? A success. That's not a horror story.
No, it really turned around. But with that, 30 days after bringing in the service team, we brought in a service delivery manager. So the biggest thing we realized was, wow, somebody has to be managing all of this. It is more than a full-time job at some points, right? Mm-hmm. So bringing that person on board was just as transformative as bringing the service team in. And there were some days that were, no joke, like the absolute worst days we've had in business. And I've had Tech Runner for almost 13 years now. We started it, and every time you grow, there's huge hurdles. And no matter what, if you go from 1 man to 2, or you go to 3 to 5, or if you go to $500,000 to $1 million, $1 million to 10, the hurdle's just as big every time, and this one was hard, and it hurt like no other. Hearing a customer be upset with you that you have a long-term relationship with because they're not happy with the way the service is being delivered, and looking in the mirror and realizing that that's our fault. That's 100% our fault. But the best part was realizing that we can fix it. And, you hear the terms a lot, especially in football. I want to look at the tape. I want to see what we could do. I want to see what we can improve on, and, see how this can make us better. And you hear those words all the time. But when you really get the opportunity to do it, and you really believe in doing that, it has transformed us in 60 days more than I ever possibly could have imagined.
It sounds like, isn't every horror story a story of transformation? you went through some hairy stuff, but it sounds like you came, it was all for the better good, and you came out well on the other side. That's awesome.
In almost every process that we teach, if you look at some of our past webinars with client onboarding, employee onboarding, project management, everyone has an entire phase at the end called the post-mortem. Where you learn your lessons and update your documentation. And Tom, you've taken that and just owned it.
Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you so much for sharing that, because ever since we talked, that story is stuck in my mind, and it's just it just seems like such a good one. Really glad that you guys that you shared it, and really glad you guys are doing well.
Check in with me in 30 days after a full 90. I think we'll have a real feel for where we're at. Thanks, guys.
That's awesome. Thank you again, Dan. All right, so Tom, you have a horror story that kind of goes back, one of the first ones that was shared. I'm going to go back into the comments. I'm so sorry I haven't seen. I'm going to find out who it was who shared it, but it was about cabling. And you mentioned, Tom, that you have a good cabling story too. So let's hear it.
I do. So this has come up a couple times. I know Ray has jumped on. We talked about how we stopped at some point doing things that we weren't really experts at or the best at our MSP. And I gave the example of I gave up infrastructure wiring. And I did that because I got a lot more money out of it by referring that to an infrastructure wiring company, who then in turn sent me business. But I realized I never shared with everyone what the final straw was. So I had this office, and it was your typical, what I consider typical MSP office space, which is not glamorous. We were in a small mini mall that had a very weird upstairs that looked like it was the attic, but it had sloped ceilings, but a little more room. And we were above. It was like a mini mart that specialized in lotto tickets and alcohol-laced energy drinks. I mean, that was like their primary thing. It was very sketchy. and then also above a Subway sandwich shop, which I can't even go near those places anymore. I just smelled that bread for years, drove me crazy. But we were up there, and one day we needed wiring. So I had one of my guys up in this crawl space in the attic, running wire, and this
is
guy,
getting spooky.
This guy was very accident prone. He had dropped like huge desks on himself and broken client equipment. I mean, it was always something. And I'd asked him to be careful. I was not thinking. I was in the middle of a meeting, and this guy fell through the ceiling into my meeting, grabbed on, and it was not pretty because this was not like a regular ceiling tiles. This was a drywall ceiling. So he took out like an 8-foot chunk of drywall, fell into my meeting, and grabbed on like to a rafter on his way down, and actually held himself up and then pulled himself back up into the ceiling. But totally interrupted my meeting, and that was the final straw. After that, I was like, I knew this wiring thing was not good. We should not be doing it. And after that, I even hired someone to come in and do our wiring needs when we needed it.
I probably should have stopped after the first 2 ceiling step throughs as well, huh?
And the problem is when you mess up drywall or ceilings, it's so much more expensive than having someone come and drop a cable in for $120 a drop.
I probably didn't learn my lesson fast enough because my dad was a handyman. I would call him the home business.
Yeah. Right. And I don't know. We have I was really hoping that we'd get maybe Sean or Ray or someone like that, or Kristen to come on and share a horror story with us.
Every time I see them, they're always offering me tequila. I don't know what's up with that.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Sean's offering you tequila, right?
That was at 8 a.m. this morning, though.
No, this morning. Wow.
I kid somewhat.
Yeah, well, Ray is regaling us in the chat here, dropping a 6-foot ceiling tile from a 20-foot drop ceiling. Almost hit a woman and her kids. Oh my God, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and Ray stopped doing cabling too. So there you go.
If there's anything taken away here from today, well, let's go back to. I'm curious about the service manager role. Oh wait, actually, look at this. Hey, Kristen.
With the backdrop. Wow.
Yep. The last time I was on kind of put things in perspective to me. So I realized that not everybody wanted to see the shoe closet, the shoe rack behind me.
Hey, it's reality, Let's keep it real.
Yeah, Felix is downstairs playing in a box. So
I mean, I don't blame him.
He doesn't come when you call him?
he's so enthralled with this box right now. I'll go get him.
No, it's all right.
We're gonna have to work on our content. Hopefully, Felix is not impressed. Hopefully, we got Kevin Clune who's looking for content for his newsletter. Hopefully, we'll spice this up a little bit and give him something to work with. But Kristen, thanks for coming on.
Sure.
And you're mentioning that you've got some horror stories that you're kind of bragging about, actually.
Well, I definitely have interesting stories, client stories. I don't know. Some of them are probably definitely not appropriate, maybe when I get to know the group a little better, but I actually did get a client. He's still my client. 4 years later, I went to Key West with him. It's kind of, if you fire your IT company and hire me, then I'll go to Key West with you. So it's kind of a win-win. And I still have the contract to this day. I ended up dropping off a laptop one day and ended up at the strip club with my construction company clients. So they're all over the place, but hey, I go above and beyond for my clients, and sometimes, they don't see my face that often. So if they want to spend some quality one-on-one time in a strip club, I do what I need to do.
Is this going to documentation?
Yeah, I hope this isn't going in the newsletter. Without construction company, please.
Listen, I mean, I was expecting something. It's Florida, so I'm not surprised we went down this path. So,
But yeah, I mean, but it goes into these are some of the things that you have to do for clients. What about what about the client horror stories? Because really, when we step back at this, we're talking about processes, documentation, everything you're putting in place to make sure that you're able to do things efficiently. But I mean, if you have a bad client, it can throw all of that stuff against the wind, right? Anything that you want to speak to about that, Alan?
Sure. I'll give you two quick examples. Maybe I have plenty. Again, I'm the positive guy, right? So
yes.
I don't know how many of you are still working on converting break fix to MSP. I am not a pundit who says you have to do that. It can be good if you like recurring revenue in that business model. In my early days, the first client I converted, I was working my butt off for too little money, very busy, growing a business. And finally, I'm like, hey, Alan, you should do KPIs. Yeah, I learned stuff the hard way. And I looked at the agreement profitability, and my agreement profitability was negative 40%. Meaning I was writing the client a check every month. Not even, oh, I'm not profitable enough or it's not worth my time. I was literally paying people to go serve the client out of my pocket.
Oh, yeah.
But that number was all I needed to have the conversation with the client. I'm like, I'm afraid to lose the revenue. I was like, wait a minute. I'm losing revenue by having the revenue. So I went to the client and said, hey, look, you're my first MSP client. I've run the numbers.
Losing money.
I'm losing money. So... and they graciously agreed to not only my price increase, but they actually offered extra.
Wow.
They appreciated the service we were doing. So don't be afraid to have those conversations and know your numbers. That's certainly one horror story. And I'm going to give one more if there's time, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from the time that I sold my business and about 2 MSPs later that I was managing, I ran into a client that I had both taken from them, and then later they went somewhere else, and then I brought them back into this other place that I was at. And they were notoriously cheap. They didn't do things the right way. They always complained. They had high demands and low tolerance for BS. And they're talking about firing them. And I was like, I tell you what, let's run some numbers. We ran the numbers, and I said, look, we were on this transition, moving our OML, operational maturity level, up to a level where, look, we have standards. We do things a certain way for a certain reason because we know how to guarantee results. And so I said, let's give them this presentation. Look, sorry, you've had this string of whatever. This is how we do things now. This is how we get results. If you want results, here's what we're going to do. Here's the price. They not only signed up for it, they are still with them, highly profitable 8 years later after threatening to leave. So you can offer your clients to do things the right way, even if you thought they were a PITA. And I will spend 15 seconds on the third story. I've done numerical analysis. Everybody asks, how much do you charge? How much does it cost per server, per workstation, per user, yada, 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 yada. The only factor I could find that had an impact on the numbers to predict ahead of time is the pain in the butt factor, the PITA factor. It was the only one that ever correlated. It wasn't industry. It wasn't size. It was just how much do they harass you, period.
Well, okay, well, I think we need a little bit more than 15 seconds on that last point. Expand on that a little bit. Like, how do you quantify the pain in the ass factor?
So my college degree is computer science with knowledge-based systems, which was the early versions of AI. Not that I did anything super scientific with that, but I remember these computer programs you would give them numbers, just tons of data sets, and they would just start guessing at a formula to create those. And that's what AI effectively does. It says, how do I get to this conclusion? Just test. I won't get into all the other scientific details, but I basically did the same thing manually. I ran lots of spreadsheets with actual data. I looked at our cost per client. I put all the different numbers for servers, switches, locations, trying to find a commonality or some numbers that would bring the numbers close together. And as soon as I made the PITA factor, as soon as I made it the largest portion of the formula, I had success. Meaning, if I had a 5-person firm that we all said they're a pain in the butt, and I had a 100-person firm that we said they're a pain in the butt, the numbers matched. Likewise, if I did the same thing for an easy client, both at 10 users and 100 users, the formula worked. And so it really came down that client attitude was everything.
So then what was where did it go from there? Did you guys have did you try to phase people out? Did you try to make them not? Was there like a pain in the ass like rehabilitation program or like?
There was, and I mean, it's the PETA factor is always going to be there, right? But just like any maturing company, and again, not everybody has to be this strict of a way. It's a business model. For them, it was like, okay, we have to remove their pain points. But because of this PETA factor, that means we had to have appropriate revenue to go with it. And we would occasionally offer solutions because we could see they were frustrated. So, hey, look, you're frustrated. We ran the numbers. Your print server is the number one thing you call about, which is not an uncommon situation. And we would go back to engineering and we would say, here is a solution, the right solution for a print server. And this is a painful solution, but it's going to make this other pain go away permanently. So we were constantly finding solutions like that, hey, selling projects and making it go away. I'll also add, I think we moved some of those contracts to all these pricing concerns are really only about the first month. Because after you get them on board and you have some time, you have real data, and you always can go back to them and says, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is how we have to fix your contract. Whether it's more revenue, less scope, or a project to fix problems, that pricing conversation is only for day one. After that, you should be looking at your numbers and coming up with solutions like this.
All right. So, well, thank you for that. And Tom, I mean, I know you've got a bunch of stuff to talk about in terms of pain in the ass clients, but let's back it up to a little bit to working with the service manager. Because that's something that Dan was talking about. It's something, if we look at the polls here, we've got some people have a dedicated one, some people don't. Alan, you made a great point of even if you don't, you are the service manager. But you guys have both, in conversation with me, talked about finding the right person who's able to handle that role and maybe own some of this in terms of looking at documentation, KPIs, maybe be the person who gets the technician, gets you out of that role, right, as the owner, so you can focus on other stuff. And Alan, you had specific ideas about who works and who doesn't. But Tom, I know you have some of that too. You've even worked with some clients to help find the right person, right?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Tom. Sorry. Yeah, your volume just went kind of crazy. I know this is the horror edition, but it sounds very garbly. So maybe if you try refreshing. And then while you're doing that, Alan, do you want to jump in there and talk about your advice there in terms of
sure. And this advice, you've probably heard it 100 times, but when you promote your best technician to service manager, you just lost your best technician and got your worst service manager. And I've actually the last MSP I worked for as an employee, I came in behind that, meaning they just demoted that person back to being their best technician. And he was no longer their best technician because, well, I was managing and now some other guys coming in. It was difficult. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you certainly want to make sure you have a manager and not a lead technician becoming a manager.
Yeah, and if you're looking for, welcome back, Tom. Welcome back. So Alan was just making that point. I don't know if you heard it. But making that point that it's a lot like I've seen this involved with sales too, right? If you've got sales reps, if you're a good sales rep, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to become a good sales manager. And I've seen this now applied. Alan's saying this kind of works the same way with technicians too. Just because you're a good technician doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be a good service manager.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I view this role, or even going up to maybe the next level, director of operations, you'll see in a larger MSP, as pretty much the most pivotal role in scaling an MSP up, at least from what I found. The person in there, I want someone who has a technical background, has aspirations to be management, has a level of leadership, and can be, for me, it was installing a gatekeeper between me and the rest of the organization so that I could work on sales, I could work on closing, I could work on high-level management issues, and have someone that handled all the service. Those problems didn't come to me, but that understood also, what clients need, understood the contracts, and was able to drive the business forward on that personal level with the clients.
So like a business thinking technician.
Yes. Yeah. And that was kind of, I talk about it. We actually have a podcast series we're starting to work on. And that's one of the pivotal things I talk about is that's what allowed my business to scale. I can look at it and where it's popped. And it's when I separated out, not only from not doing tech work anymore, but installed the right person in place that sat between and was the head, not only of the technicians, I had a lead technician, but was the head of everything service related in the business.
Tom, that reminds me, I actually wrote a blog post on this a few weeks ago. It was called Get Stupid. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of even a good manager type tier 3 top technician coming in is everybody knows what he knows. When I became service manager, I think I made it 2.5 years before people realized that I also knew technology. Because I came in and I played dumb. I'm like, well, how would you fix that? Well, what's the process for that? It was about 2.5 years before I had a technician who just could not get the job done. Customer was unhappy. I went to the customer site, fixed it in 30 minutes that he didn't spend 18 hours in a ticket for. And they're like, oh, crap, this guy does know what he's talking about. And I think it takes that level of separation that you don't feel the need to solve everything for people because you have to manage with process and people, not technical knowledge.
I mean, Tom, I like your comment there, Ray. Yeah, Tom, a big thing for you. You talk about this all the time, that ability to step back, and that's what's going to let you scale is the ability to you're building up processes, you're helping other people do things so you don't have to do everything.
Yeah, that was probably the hardest thing I ever did was stepping away from and saying, I'm not doing technical work at all anymore for clients. And that, of course, there was a transition, figuring that out, and letting people take those reins and run with it, and dealing with the fact that it was probably not going to be done the way I exactly would have done it, but that I had to enable those people and give them leadership ability and give them the ability to figure out themselves and not be right over the sword. Not going back to what Alan said, not be micromanaging completely, and figure it out to be able to scale the business.
I say something very crude and crass about this. And so I guess it's made to be a little sensational, but the secret to running a business is to lower your standards. That sounds horrible. I know it, but
fine, yeah.
But they're not going to do it quite the way you would, and that should be okay. I remember when I hired my first technician, and I was trying to make that transition because he had 40 hours a week available, and I had negative 20. Clients, no, I want you, Alan. I was like, okay, at first, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm available next Friday. Glad to do it for you. By the way, my new guy, he's available right now. What would you prefer? In 95% of the time, I'll take the new guy. A year later, I knew I had success when somebody called me like, is the owner there? I was like, that's me. He's like, no, I mean, the new guy, is he the owner?
Yeah.
They thought he was the owner. I was like, oh, well, let me get it. I didn't correct them. I just like, oh, that's what you want. I'll forward you over.
It hurt a little bit at first. Yeah. When people thought that I did it as the leader of the company. And then I realized, no, this is good. Yeah. This is scalable. I can sell this business someday because it's not all about me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, we see in the agenda doc, I'll go ahead and share another link to it. We've got some additional resources, and Alan, I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that a little bit. But one of the things that we share in there is a webinar with Nigel Moore from the Tech Tribe, and this is a point that he brings up too, is that listen, like everyone's got an exit. And Tom, you brought this up in our last MSP live chat. Even if you're not building to be acquired immediately, you're going to exit at some point, and so you may as well start building like you're going to. And a lot of that comes down to attracting the right acquirer. They're going to be looking for something that they don't want to have to figure all this stuff out in a new way. I mean, if you have things that's organized, they don't want you, right? They want you to jump in.
Yeah, when I did my exit, my VP stuck around for 6 months, but I exited the day of the sale.
Nice.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I didn't think I could handle watching things change, get rid of people, all these things that were then, completely out of what I could do. So that's the way I positioned it, and it worked quite well.
This is Alex Farling from Lifecycle, who's on the chat. He just went through this. Well, hey, we've got some. I love the direction the chat's gone in with like scariest places to go on site. I mean, Kristen, since you're talking about interesting on sites, do you have any comments for that one?
I worked on a server in a bathroom once for a company. That was kind of gross, especially when someone had to go in and use the bathroom, and then I had to go in after. So taking turns.
The toilet chair, right? I've been through that one.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't really have any other that I could think of off the top of my head. I just have really strange client stories that I could like go on and on about that my friends love to hear about.
and the water heater over top of the server, not only in the bathroom, but I've one before, and making them sign off on a document saying we are not responsible for anything that happens in this room.
Yeah, that's not a good situation. To say the least.
Man, it's one of the great, fascinating, and slightly bewildering things is working with small and medium business clients because, man, there are so many weird small medium businesses out there. It keeps things interesting.
On that ability to sell front, I actually had 5 offers for my business over 3 years. And I was interested in selling to all of them. The first 4 were failures, and they were all failures on my part. But the process was so enlightening. In fact, it's where I first really began to, I think, develop our maturities. I would get the offer letter or a letter of intent. We get to the end of discovery, and they'd be like, no, I'm not seeing this, and this, or this is a problem. I would go look at that. It's like, okay. And then I get to work on fixing it. And lo and behold, somebody else would offer for my company. And I would have those checkboxes done. And then there's a new list of things to fix. It's like, okay, I can fix this. Anywhere from, having signed agreements back in the early days to, getting myself out of being a technician completely to having a ticketing system, how revenue was recorded. There's all sorts of things that I kept learning how to improve. So I think if anything of these horror stories, just that, or as I say, if you learn from your mistakes, I must be a genius by now because I've made a lot of mistakes.
I was recently talking with someone in the Discord group, and he was saying the ultimate cheat code is being able to close down and start fresh at a new MSP. Then you can do everything the right way.
Yeah.
So we've got Ray on, and I mean by popular demand, right? Really, Ray, you're here, and that's awesome. We love you. But here's Guinness.
Let's be real honest. It's not for me. It's for Guinness. Yeah. Say hi to Felix. Say hi to Rachel. Say hi to everybody. Say hi to Kristen. Yeah. She's not happy right now. I think she was napping, and then I had my wife bring her up, and she was not. She's not happy. So.
Awesome to see Guinness getting older and wiser every day. Ray,
one of us should be.
Well, thank you, Ray. That was great to see you. And
come on, Ray, you got a horse story. Yeah, you're in Florida too, so you got the interesting ones.
So I figure if we're gonna do Halloween and we're gonna do horror, I'm gonna do it right. I mean, I'm going to go full.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, going back to what Tom was saying with the cabling, the last time we did structured cabling was
Keep going.
I love that. Let me tell you about a story. No, I mean, if we go into Adam's family, I'm in, dude. Anyway, so we were doing structured cabling. We should not have been. I love the tools. I love the toys, but we should not have been doing structured cabling. And we were doing it at a Subway because, as we've seen, all MSPs apparently hang out near Subways. I was doing this for a telco. This was not me. This was one of my guys who shall not be named. And it was in a Walmart. And Walmart has 20-foot ceilings, and so we're running cabling in the drop ceiling, acoustic ceiling, 20 feet up. He's on a scissor lift, and we hear a bang, and of course everybody around just immediately head snaps over, looks what's going on, and one of the 6-foot acoustic tiles from the ceiling had fallen 20 feet, and no exaggeration at all, 3 feet from a woman pushing a shopping cart with her children. And that was the moment I said, we need to stop doing this. I could not live with myself if something bad happened. The company would not survive if we had to go through that lawsuit, even with the insurance. And that was the, oh my gosh moment that I'm done. And apparently Guinness wanted to come back. So
He didn't want us back anyways.
yeah.
And I see, maybe Kristen's bringing a Felix too, but I want to see, man, did everyone see in the chat Ed's story here? Because this is incredible. Ed, I'm going to invite you on to talk about this a little bit because it's truly terrifying. It sounds like I just watched recently Return of the Living Dead, which is an amazing film. And it kind of has some elements of that reminds me of. Oh, look at this, the 2 cats.
Oh, I love that. My wife has a black cat named Wednesday, and she has the attitude to match it. So
Yeah, he's pretty crazy. He does whatever he wants. He runs into the sliding lanai doors, the glass doors, attacks the curtains. No idea why. He's smaller. His brain might be a little tinier than most, but he's lovable.
I think Ed may have heard me and jumped out. Smart move, Ed. We'll get you next time. Alan, before we go too off the rails with this, so we got a couple minutes left. Of course, we can all go over. We're having a good time, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about some of these things that you've made available because your website's got some cool resources. And I'm going to bring up on the screen the agenda doc so we can just kind of walk through some of this stuff.
Sure, I'll do a quick screen share.
Oh, even better.
Too many video sources, it says currently, though.
Oh, hey, Kristen, do you mind if
Not at all.
adios? Okay.
Kristen,
Thank you so much for coming on.
He thinks I could contribute, guys. Thanks
How's
for
it going?
And Ray, we'll hold on to you for a second. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to get rid of my screen. Sorry, guys. Okay, Alan, you should be good to go there.
You tell me, am I?
Cool. Yes, there we are.
All right, so EurekaProcess.com does have a community site where you can join. Heck, I love to draw comparisons to Nigel Moore at Tech Tribe. I see some of his clients are with us and vice versa. I love to see what Nigel has to say next time as well. This is not our bread and butter. We're not here to sell anything, but we do record any process that we write. We categorize it and we put it into our community site. So this is actually behind the curtain. It's logged in as me. I love jumping straight down to see what's popular. I can tell you if you go to look at the registration page, this one is linked for free on that page. The Client Welcome Initiative is new client onboarding. It's a 10-page document. That alone hopefully is worth the click to go download it. And if you would like to consider joining our community, it's free for 7 days. So feel free to pop in, look around. All of our documents have download links, so you can download it. I'm not offended if you don't like what you see. Love to hear from you on how we can improve. But feel free to check out the 7-day trial. No commitment whatsoever. Download links here. I have them all in Word, Excel, or Lucid Charts documents so you can see them. And that's the skinny behind what's there. Lots of stuff in documentation, and maybe even a shout out for those of you who like Facebook forums to ITDUG. It's at ITDUG. It's the IT Documentation Users Group. It's peers helping peers get their documentation straight. I do weigh in a fair amount there almost daily. And we have an entire ITDUG series of webinars that we're doing. We have one more coming up shortly. It's a roundtable discussion about documentation tips and tricks. And you can see all of our past videos. These are for free, by the way, under Resources ITDUG.
That's awesome. I just shared in the chat links to both of those things, the Facebook group. And let's see. Okay, Doug, standardized job descriptions. I'm supposed to remind about.
That was a conversation he and I had in the chat earlier. We do have some job descriptions in here. Service coordinator is one of those. So HR01 is how to build one. And we're slowly building our libraries of job descriptions. And if you will just email myself or Brooke, who's also on this chat, We're doing some screening for some of our clients now, and we have some job descriptions we're glad to peruse with you.
Nice. And now I'm gonna I'll drop in your email. Well, actually, Alan@eurekaprocess.com. Everybody, we can add that to the doc too. But yeah, I mean, great resource for people who are just looking to see what does documentation look like, right, and get some ideas. Great thing to check out.
And documentation. Quick tidbit. I hate screenshots. Screens change. I'd rather go for descriptions and bullet points than screenshots if I can help it. You shouldn't be teaching people how to use your tools in your documentation. You should assume that's been handled during onboarding and teach them how we use those tools.
Good point for that. And Ray, before we wrap up here, thanks again for coming on. And we actually way back, my God, like in May, which feels like 2-3 years ago at this point, you came on as part of our security summit, and you were talking a lot about process and documentation. You were active in the chat this whole time. Any other thoughts from you in terms of how things have worked on your guys' end? Things that you'd like to share? Just in general.
I like the way this sounds.
Oh, nothing. Okay. Well, Ray.
Yeah, I have a lot
if you try to if you try refreshing, that might help.
The session in the browser.
Well, Tom, any parting thoughts from you?
Well, I'd just like to say I met Alan through this process. Jonathan and he, I think we're in some kind of same group and talked, and I've been very impressed. And if I was running an MSP today, I would be, whether it was already in place, especially if I was starting one up early stage, I would be engaging Alan and his team on process and setting it up right in the first place. And it would be a go-to for me.
Well, there you go, Alan.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
I've been impressed with you too.
Thank you. I just talk about what I did now, but I enjoy it. And these are great. And I know Jonathan can probably tell you about our next one coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to have our next one's going to be in the month of November. And I think November 5th. And then whatever 2 weeks is after that, the 19th, I believe. And so we're going to have Ken Patterson from PAX 8 on for one of those, talking about building out your stack. And then we're also going to have Chris Weiser is going to be on to talk about what you're giving away for free and what you should and what you shouldn't be giving away for free. So that's going to be some good conversations coming up there. Ray, you're back and you're able to. Oh yes, there's your voice. There we go. Yeah, I don't know. Any parting thoughts from you?
No, I mean, it's scary. The one thing that we didn't bring up, but Alex touched on, was how terrifying it is watching somebody else do the job you used to do. As you grow, as you expand, that is terrifying, at least to me. And I know many other business owners feel that way. And it's a fear you have to live with. That's not one of those that you can do anything about. Train them well and go occupy yourself with other stuff like these MSP live chats. So.
Yeah, and as you point out in the chat too, and Tech Bar coming out tomorrow.
Tech Bar tomorrow. Yeah, we're with Dennis Zarovetsky from Adept Cloud, and Alex and Marnie are always on. Alan's been on as a previous guest. And Jonathan is you're scheduled with us coming up in a month or two, right?
That's right. So, I think it's December. Yeah.
Start training now.
Oh, yeah. Believe me, I am. If you have any tips, you can share them with me.
But it's a good time. It is non-professional. It is totally fun. So absolutely, anybody's welcome to join.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ray, again, and Alan. Thank you so much for doing this. You had so many good stories to share. A lot of good tips. Obviously, everyone check out the site. We'll be following up with an email that has the link to this recording. Or if you want to relive the magic right now, as soon as the broadcast ends, you just wait a few moments. The recording is available, so you'll have that link. And then we'll also be emailing the agenda doc too. And I'm going to be furiously filling that out with some additional resources based off this conversation. But thanks everybody so much for joining. Alan, thank you again.
My pleasure. I can't wait to send the link to my mom. Look, Mom, I'm
There you
famous.
go. All right, everybody. Take care. Thank you for the horror stories. Be safe out there, and we'll see you soon.
Later, guys.